Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 20th of February 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And behind the technical desk is Nick Green. We're pleased to say the weather in Plymouth, at least, is not bad at all. In fact, there's been mention of a balmy spring approaching. So maybe that's the benefit of the telegraph beavers and the global warming. If you're not familiar with that educational story from the Daily Telegraph, just Google global warming, beavers and Siberian squirrels. It's not all bad news. Well, Mike's going to start off with events in Greece, and following that we're going to bring in David Scott from north of the border with the Scott Report.
Okay, so, well, today Eurozone ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss what to do about Greece. Well, it's a real problem for them because the Greek people, as we know, have elected a new government, which seems to be pretty unprepared to allow their country to be asset stripped by the Troika. And the Troika, for those that don't remember, is the IMF, the EU and the European Central Bank. So yesterday, Greek Finance Minister Varoufakis, excuse my pronunciation of that
French,
name.
I think that is, Mike.
Right. He wrote to Eurozone finance ministers and also to Mario Draghi, who's the president of the European Central Bank, and he was asking for a 6-month extension to the current loan agreement. And of course, the aim was that the debt would be reorganised and the government in Greece would start rebuilding the economy, which is, as a result of austerity at the moment, literally killing people. So, unfortunately, Germany decided to reject that suggestion straight away. This article here, Keep Talking Greece, on the Keep Talking Greece website, highlights the situation with regard to austerity and the effect that it's been having on people. And they've published this little infographic that's doing the rounds on the internet, showing GDP decreased by 25% since the austerity measures. Unemployment has reached 27%, but youth unemployment is up at 60%. And that's 1.2 million people having lost their jobs since the austerity measures came into force. 250,000 young Greek scientists have emigrated, according to this. And so it goes on. The numbers do not look terribly good. And on another article on the same website, they're pointing out 25% of Athens school children going hungry at the moment. So anyway, getting back to the letter to the finance ministers, Germany immediately rejected that, as I said, and so the Greek government made the contents public. But even inside the European Central Bank, there is a recognition that actually this debt is unrepayable and something needs to be done to organise an exit from the euro. Unfortunately, George Osborne, of course, he says that the Greek exit from the euro puts the UK economy at risk, as usual. Well, disingenuously swapping the terms economy and financial system, because of course he doesn't care about the British economy, he only cares about the financial system. And it's the financial system which is bankrupt, not Greece. So this is the key story here for what's driving this. Even the United Nations aware, according to Value Walk here, of Greek derivatives risk. So what's going on there? Well, this is companies like Goldman Sachs and so on taking short positions on Greek debt and creating derivatives contracts on Greek debt, which have left them in a real serious position if the Greeks don't pay it back. I think the key point here, Brian, is that we've got to remember that this Greek debt, well, only 10% of the money that was borrowed by Greece from the IMF actually went into any kind of productive purpose. The rest went to bail out banks. So this isn't really a debt that the Greek people owe at all. It is a banking system. It's a result of the banking system collapse. The money went straight into the banks. And effectively what's happened here is that money has been lent to the Greeks to pay off a debt which the banks created. And people are being expected to swallow austerity and have their lives decimated in order to keep the financial system afloat. That's all George Osborne's interested in. That's all the finance ministers are interested in. And I think we've got to support the Greek people in recognising that that debt is illegitimate and shouldn't be paid.
Isn't it wonderful to see that at least some countries in the world know what to do when life is getting tough, and that's to print the truth. So take the lid off these negotiations behind closed doors with corrupt international banks and, of course, a fraudulent international banking system. Print the truth, release it to the general public, and all of a sudden you are on the path to correcting the problem in the first place. Well, if there's openness in the Greek media system, there isn't the same thing north of the border. So I think we'll bring in David Scott here. And David, would you like to make any comment on sort of free press and media in Scotland versus what perhaps we're seeing in Greece?
Yes. Yes. Firstly, on Greek debt, it is of course a bailout of the German banks, not of the Greek nation. And 185% of GDP, it cannot be repaid, will not be repaid. It's only a matter of when they're going to default. And there is a risk when you enter into a contract with someone to lend money at interest. You factor in risk into that, that goes if that arrangement's successful, it yields private profit, which is fine. But what we're seeing is we're socialising the losses, and that's not fine. It's certainly not fine for the Greek people.
Absolutely.
Now,
okay.
Now Scotland has seen a little bit of light shed on some of the inner workings of our legal and press systems and establishment that we maybe didn't realise a year or two ago just how closely integrated everything is in Scotland. So I think you've got a story that illustrates that quite nicely.
Well, we'll bring that up on screen for our viewers and obviously just talk through. But this is a recap of a report we did a couple of days ago. This is the Sun, the Scottish Sun, exposing that a vast writ had been issued as a result of money disappearing with a big hedge fund. I'll leave you to give the details of that. But core to this was this firm, Levy and Macrae. Many people north of the border say that this immensely powerful law firm has literally been controlling press and media. And the gentleman highlighted there, who was one of the partners of Levy Macrae, Peter Watson, he was heavily active when Eilish Angelini, the former Lord Advocate, was pursuing Robert Greene. We'll come on to that. But the allegations are that Peter Watson himself was director of subsidiaries of the main hedge fund. And so at the moment he appears to be personally caught up in the writ. But of course he's jumped ship and left Levy Macrae. But the latest one, which I know you're going to talk a little bit about, is from the Herald Scotland. Here we've got Scots law firms sued after 400 million hedge fund collapse. But the focus has now been shifted onto Bernice Paul. But it's very interesting. In the article, it says one of Levy and Macrae's former partners, Peter Watson, was a director of Mathon Limited for under a year and of another affiliate, Mathon Capital, for under 2 years. Levy and Macrae, which provides legal advice to the Herald and Times Group, publishers of the Herald, made no comment. Mr. Watson was not available for comment. Well, he's disappeared from the scene. But it's fascinating that here is the reporter that's produced this article. Suddenly we're deflecting away from Levy and Macrae. It's David Lease, the chief reporter of the Herald. And let's just have a look at how he fits into a very interesting system north of the border. He is the man that produced a pretty hard-hitting article attacking Anne and Holly Gregg. He said that the whole of the child abuse case around Holly Gregg was effectively a fantasy. Well, why are we interested in this particular gentleman? Well, let's bring it in one of our famous network diagrams. So we've now got the fact that Levy and Macrae acting for the Herald and Times Group. But of course, they were also acting directly for the former Lord Advocate herself, Eilish Angelini. And it was Angelini who allegedly used public money to pursue a private case to silence Robert Greene in particular for exposing child abuse north of the border. But of course, we are particularly interested in Levy and McRae, and Peter Watson in particular, because he was the man who signed the threatening letter to the UK column, where he said he was acting for Eilish Angelini. He didn't state whether that was in person or in government capacity. And that brings us nicely back to Mr. Leask himself, because he wrote the hack article, which was clearly designed to undermine the whole of the Holly Gregg abuse case. And of course, in doing that, what he was essentially doing, knowingly or unknowingly, was protecting the Scottish establishment. So I am a mere Englishman south of the border, David. Over to you for the detail.
Yes, I think it's worth bearing in mind the nature of the press in Scotland. Although you've seen a lot about Twitter and social media as part of the Yes campaign, in fact, the main newspapers in Scotland are enormously powerful in terms of forming opinion. Papers like the Herald and the Scotsman, they don't necessarily have a huge circulation, but it's a very influential circulation. And what is said in these papers actually goes a long way to define the political discourse in Scotland. So when you have something like this tie-in between Levy and McRae, who act for a number of the newspapers and television outlets, they also act for STV, I think, and they also act for Alex Salmond, and they're well connected in the Scottish government. When you see people like that influencing and dictating what happens in the press, they are going a very long way towards dictating what is talked about in Scotland. So the power they've got is very substantial. On the Angelini matter, it's no longer simply that Angelini is alleged to have used public funds. We've had it confirmed by the Crown Office that the funds that she required to carry out a private civil case against Robert Greene, funds which were paid to Levy and McRae, were provided by the Crown Office, so by the British taxpayer. So that we're trying to find out more, but at the moment the Crown Office are refusing to answer Freedom of Information requests. The Information Commissioner in Scotland will not back, at the moment anyway, our request for an appeal, and the Her Majesty's Inspector of Prosecutions in Scotland has also declined to have anything to do with investigating why the Crown Office is using public funds to fund its own staff carrying out private civil litigation against people they don't like. The case in point, the fraud which is being investigated, it's being investigated by the Crown Office. It's perhaps going to go to a criminal prosecution. There has been a report by the been sent to the fiscal, and so we might actually see some people in dock over this. There's also a very large lawsuit ongoing against Levy and McRae and other law firms, and Peter Watson and a whole lot of other people. And despite the Herald paper playing down Peter Watson's involvement, he was a director of two of the companies involved for substantial periods. I mean, less than 2 years is still a substantial period in directing a major investment company. So he must have a considerable amount of personal responsibilities of how he's conducted matters within these companies. And I'm sure that's something that the appropriate authorities will be having a look at.
David, thank you for that. And of course, we could perhaps remind viewers and listeners that we've recently had Peter Oborne resigning from the Telegraph because of the dealings between the Telegraph and HSBC Bank, which I know Mike is going to come on to later in the programme. But this is very, very dangerous when we see what should be free, independent press and media not doing the job, not investigating crime and corruption. They are themselves being controlled by some very dubious outlets. Well, we need to move on. We'll bring you in on some of the other topics, but on the subject of the state, what better topic than spying?
Yeah, well, this is a couple of days old now, but I wanted to bring it to everybody's attention in case you hadn't seen it. And basically, this is, well, we've all lived. Anybody that's bought a PC in the last number of years has lived with the fact that there's all kinds of rubbish pre-installed on the PC alongside the operating system. But this is a new dimension because Lenovo have been caught installing an application called Superfish, which is considered by many of the antivirus applications as, in fact, a virus, so potentially virus-like in its activity. But what it does is that it routes all your internet traffic, all your web browsing traffic through their servers so that they can inject their adverts into your web pages, thereby getting around Google and so on. But what's even more dangerous about this situation is that what's been discovered is that, in fact, as part of the install, they are installing an encryption certificate on your PC, which allows them to actually act as a man in the middle and decrypt any encrypted traffic going to your bank or your credit card company, this kind of thing. Now, this only applies if you're using Internet Explorer or Chrome, because both those applications use a centralized store of these certificates. If you're using Firefox, that doesn't apply, but nonetheless, this is a pretty dangerous development. And if we see other PC manufacturers moving in the same direction, it's pretty nasty. But hopefully, the backlash, which is already on the internet over this, will see Lenovo drop this idea and maybe other manufacturers as well.
It's amazing, isn't it? We've got the internet, which is spying on us, and of course the means of breaking open what's happened is to use the internet.
That's absolutely right.
Irony.
Yes, and well, this is the other news story on the same sort of topic. More Edward Snowden revelations. This time, a company which manufactures SIM cards. This is Gemalto, and they manufacture a significant proportion of the SIM cards that we all have in our mobile phones. And what has come to light is that a joint group, a joint task force within the NSA and GCHQ hacked Gemalto's servers and stole the encryption keys that were being used for most of the SIM cards that are being used in people's mobile phones. 450 different telecoms companies affected by this around the world. And what this basically does is allows GCHQ and the NSA to listen to people's telephone conversations and also watch their data transmissions without needing any particular warrant. They don't need any special permission because they don't actually have to go to the telecoms companies or interact with the telecoms companies in any way. It is a backdoor in people's mobile phones, which is actually within the little chip that goes into the little SIM card that goes inside the mobile phone. So an incredible revelation, and
but at least it's out, so we're aware of it now, which is the key thing, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Right, well, if you're worried about all of this activity, we're still encouraging people strongly to come along to the British Constitution Group conference at the end of this month, being run jointly with UK Column. We're going to talk about the key issues, the attack on Britain's constitution and common law, and of course, how is all this being controlled? Well, ultimately, it's blackmail through the child abuse system, the paedophilia system, which is clearly linked to both the British establishment and Westminster. So here's the conference. You can now see in detail what the programme is, but we've got a short advert and then I'll talk a little bit on the speakers.
It's the time for action. The UK Column and the British Constitution Group present their Spring Conference 2015. The networking starts Friday evening, 27th of February, running to late Sunday evening, 1st of March, at the Park in Telford, Shropshire. On-site accommodation available at special rates. Visit www.events.gb.com now and grab your tickets. UKC and BCG members, check your own websites for discount rates. Go on, do it now. This really is the time for action.
Well, there you are. That's some of the key detail about the conference, but let's just have a look at the actual programme. You can find this online. Visit UK Column website and look on the spring conference, and you'll see that this programme is there. So some of the key speakers that we've got: Ian Puddick, many people aware of him, unbelievable story of harassment, threats and abuse from police to Ian in person and his business. We've got Justin Walker talking about the Bradbury Pound, David Kameh talking about what really underlines common law. Where does that come from? Far deeper than just men making law. And on the Sunday, we've got an excellent lineup. John Witterick talking about the nature of the cage around us. Field McConnell giving an update from the USA. Vinnie Byrne, who should be over from Ireland. Guy Taylor, Mark Salon, Michael Doherty, and of course John Hurst and Strider, who are going to be pushing home the grand jury looking into what's been happening with child abuse. So if you haven't booked in yet, please get onto the website and do that. This is not just about sitting and listening. We want people who attend to leave knowing exactly what the situation is and what they can do to help. Well, let's look at the dear old BBC. We received a very nice email today. Let's read it out very quickly. Hi Brian, wonders never cease. The BBC actually reported on Beechwood, that's the children's home, Nottingham, both the 6 p.m. and the 10 p.m. main news programmes tonight. Apparently they have 150 suspected offenders, child abusers to be investigated by Nottingham Police, ? No mention of Melanie Shaw, of course. And then the person says on Question Time, the same Putin bashing carried on with not a single word from Putin's point of view. One panellist even suggested Putin was hell-bent on world domination. Really, obviously another balanced audience. Well, we certainly look at the BBC with increasing horror as they simply refuse to do their job over child abuse. Radio 4 was commenting on Nottingham. Let's look at some of the stuff that came up in that programme. It said a number of victims were speaking with strength and truth. I think we haven't listened to them. This was Paddy Tipping, the police commissioner from Nottingham, speaking. We've learned a lot from 40 years, over 40 years. To my credit, that should be to my credit, I got out of it, Paddy Tipping talking, because I thought bringing children into care was not in their best interest. They spoke to a senior social worker who said she was saying as recently as 2000 the police had failed to act. And then another so-called witness on the programme said that Nottingham Police called people from estates where crime and poverty was evident. They were calling those people snafus, which apparently stood for subnormal and effing useless. So the BBC starts off reporting, but of course they simply don't get into the meat of the subject. This was the advert from BBC's own Player. And what we're pointing out is that they're very good at having on the glitzy. Here's Samantha Morton. She said she was abused. She gets her face on the BBC News programme. But Melanie Shaw, the woman who originally blew the whistle and started the whole Beechwood Operation Daybreak investigation, well, of course, the BBC doesn't mention her at all. And it goes on because if we say, well, BBC Nottingham did cover something to do with Beechwood, they have absolutely failed to cover anything to do with victim Mickey Summers, who's been out campaigning with hundreds of people on the Nottingham streets. No coverage by the BBC. And what's the reason for this? Well, the BBC is too busy pushing dark, depressing, valueless programming, which of course is devoid of any proper investigative journalism. And as we said yesterday, and we think it's important enough to recap, in a bizarre telephone conversation, which we should be able to bring up here, we had Nottinghamshire Police saying that Melanie Shaw had been charged with false imprisonment of an individual and offences under the Communications Act, and indeed breaching her probation. But surprisingly, Nottinghamshire Probation Services has confirmed very forcefully that Melanie Shaw did not commit an official breach of her community supervision order. And they also said whoever is saying that has made a mistake. Well, is it a mistake or is it a downright lie? Nevertheless, the probation service are working on a revocation of the present charges which Nottingham Police have cooked up. So what's the BBC's take on this? Well, we just remind you that this lady, Superintendent Helen Chamberlain, she's featured strongly on the BBC Radio 4 report. She says, well, Nottinghamshire Police may be dealing with over 150 victims, but we're doing well. She says that some of the evidence was destroyed. She doesn't mention who destroyed the evidence. And as we said yesterday, we're asking what child abuse evidence was destroyed and by whom. And if Nottinghamshire Police are so good at caring for the victims of crime, why did they force entry into Melanie's home twice? So we'd like to know the detail. We spoke to the police yesterday, but they really don't want to talk to us. If you think that there's a problem in Nottinghamshire Police alone, well, we visited the Met Police website yesterday because Nottinghamshire Police claim that Operation U-Tree has given Nottinghamshire Police a review and a clean bill of health over their investigations into child abuse. We were just fascinated that when you go to the Met Police site, Operation U-Tree, the telephone number to call is nothing to do with the police, it's NSPCC. And presumably this is the same NSPCC who are accused by many child abuse victims of also being complicit in abuse, or at least the cover-up of abuse. Doesn't it fill you with reassurance and trust in your police force, Mike?
It's incredible that anyone with information doesn't go to the police, they go to a charity.
Absolutely. Well, let's just bring in this man. We've got Jack Straw. The Telegraph has written a vast report about his success as a politician. He's decided to stand down. A lot of MPs seem to be leaving at this election.
Yeah.
Don't know why that should be. He says he gets shouted at on the tube, that's the underground, and he gets called a war criminal. But he has to take responsibility for Iraq. Well, we're interested in Mr. Straw for other reasons. The Telegraph printed out all of his CV here, which includes Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary. But let's remember, this was the man who, as Minister of Justice, was working to bar parents from telling their stories, from having children taken away. And as I beg your pardon, this was the Independent. As the Independent said here, but as of April, because of a change in legislation being introduced by Jack Straw, the Justice Secretary, the media will no longer be able to identify those involved in cases such as the Websters, that was a particular child case. It will also be illegal for any children currently in care to speak out, even if they feel they're being maltreated. And so we just ask, why would you want to stop children from reporting the fact they're being abused? Well, David, we'll just give you a 30-second response to that, if you'd like it. North of the border, south of the border, nobody wants to talk about child abuse.
Yes, well, north of the border, we have Sir Stephen House. Now, he's had a rough week. He's been in front of the Select Committee in the Scottish Parliament, been asked questions about the policy of having consensual searches of under 12s, which was meant to be stopped, and then figures were released which made it clear it hadn't been stopped. Then Sir Stephen came out and said the figures were wrong, and the Information Commissioner forced the release of the figures, and then emails were released which showed that that was not true. Sir Stephen said that he had used the wrong words. He, I suppose, misspoke. Like Hillary Clinton famously did. Sir Stephen House has also had controversy here over introducing armed police into places in the Highlands which had no need for armed officers. And he was also, and quite disturbingly, in charge of some of the child abuse inquiries while he was in the Met, which suddenly mysteriously stopped when they got too near to the wrong people. So he's under some pressure now. One of the MSPs, Ms McInnes, with them, said that the level of trust in Police Scotland is ebbing fast. Now, Police Scotland has been a unified police force for less than a year, so it's not going well.
Well, thank you for that, David. I think the same thing is going to happen south of the border. Are the police in Britain investigating corrupt banks? Over to you, Mike.
Not really. Well, now the HSBC story rumbles on, and it's not really clear where it's going to end because it gets worse on a daily basis. So on Monday we reported it over the weekend. HSBC had published an apology from Stuart Gulliver, Group Chief Executive of HSBC Holdings plc. And he said, for our many loyal customers, shareholders and hardworking colleagues, the recent media coverage about past practices, you'll note, at our Swiss private bank and the financial affairs of some of our Swiss private bank clients has been a painful experience. Well, as I say, it's getting more painful by the day. Over the last couple of days, we've had criminal raids in Switzerland. So this is not to do with tax evasion. This is money laundering. So this is something beyond what he was apologising for. And of course, this is an activity that HSBC has a long, proud history of. And of course, the contagion of previous money laundering prosecutions continues to bite because Obama's Attorney General nominee, Loretta Lynch, is coming under severe scrutiny over her personal role in a deal which allowed HSBC to escape criminal prosecution for its part in what was being called at the time Laundergate. So this was massive money laundering operation of cash tied to drug running and arms sales involving not only Mexicans but also Middle East terrorist organizations. And of course now we have news of the ongoing investigations in India. Now of course the BBC and this website, for example the Economic Times, it's being reported that this is a further tax evasion situation. But I want to really highlight this article on this website, Great Game India. This was republished by Zero Hedge. Fantastic article of the history of HSBC and pointing out quite strongly that not only HSBC but also Coutts Bank laundered money for the Dawood Ibrahim organised Mumbai terrorist attacks in 2008. And they're also pointing out that HSBC look over their past activities, the LIBOR scandal, the fact that for over 100 years, 150 years, they've been the #1 drug money laundering bank for not only Mexican and Colombian, but also Afghani drugs as well, laundering money for related to Saudi and the creation of the Al-Qaeda networks, and so it goes on. And they also point out that they've been fined a total of £7.7 billion so far as a result of the various scandals, so-called scandals that they've been involved in. So really, it's hard to know where this story is going to end, but we now have more and more coming out of their links to terrorist activities and laundering money on behalf of not only drugs cartels but terrorist organizations. Yeah. And of course, the drug money laundering absolutely closely tied with terrorist activities around the world.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Mike. We're at the end of today's news, but perhaps a thought for the weekend is, of course, love of money, root of all evil. What have we got? Corrupt, fraudulent international banks working very closely with all three political parties in Britain, Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, and the game for the elections 2015, according to the UK column, is a super coalition drawing in Greens, SNP and indeed UKIP in order to form Britain's first one-party state. Can we stop it? Yes. How? We need millions of good people to withdraw their consent. If you'd like to know more about what to do, perhaps you'll come to the conference. If you can't, get out there telling people what you know and point them at UK Column News. Thanks very much for joining us.
See you Monday.
Bye-bye.